I'm with Sami Awad from the Holy Land Trust. Now, Sami, what is the Holy Land Trust?
Well, the Holy Land Trust is a non-profit organization that was established in Bethlehem in 1998. And it is made up of Palestinians. And as Palestinians, what we do is we look at the challenges that face the Palestinian community and ask the question, what can we do to strengthen the community to address the challenges that it faces? And of course, as you know, the Palestinians have many, many challenges, so we don't deal with everything, but we feel there are some core challenges that we feel we could really provide service and tools for the Palestinian community to engage in. Of course, the biggest challenge is the occupation. And, no matter what people think or say, we live under occupation. Our lives are controlled, our movement is controlled, our resources are controlled, access to information is controlled. The simplest human rights are violated even on an almost daily basis. So for us, when we talk about the occupation, we ask the question, what can we do to keep the Palestinian community resilient, steadfast, and resisting of this occupation? And the core value we engage in as an organization is nonviolence. We believe that nonviolence is not just an option. From a pragmatic, strategic, and a holistic point of view, we have come to our own conclusion that nonviolence is the only option for the Palestinians to engage in. So the nonviolence program is one of our main programs. It's what I call the heart of the organization, but it's not the only one. In addition to nonviolence, we also look at the challenge that many people ask, which is what is not allowing for nonviolence to evolve into a movement in Palestine until this day. Yes, we have nonviolence actions and activities that happen, but what is missing that's not taking it into a whole movement of resistance? And one of the things that we see as missing is leadership. So you could train people in nonviolence, but leadership takes a different level of engagement. So another program we are really excited about having is the Nonlinear Leadership Development Program. And this is a whole department where we don't work with people who want to become leaders or people who have the potential to be leaders. We work directly with leaders, giving them the tools and the resources to begin to engage in what they have perceived or assumed was impossible in the past. So it's like a real transformation for a leader that takes place, to have them engage in achieving breakthrough results and accomplishments in their life, focusing, of course, on the core purpose of ending the occupation and establishing peace and justice and equality between Palestinians and Israelis in this land. In addition to these two major challenges, we also work on two additional ones. I'll briefly speak about them. One is media. As many people know, many Palestinians do not trust media, especially Western media, and how it perceives and presents the Palestinian cause. So as you talk to Palestinians, you'll hear them say that Western media is one-sided, it's biased, it's doesn't show the entire side of the story. It focuses, especially with the Palestinians, it focuses on the content but not the context of events that happen. So an act of violence is seen as if it comes out of complete vacuum or out of complete hatred towards the other in the media. Like statistically, for example, in the U.S., when referring to the struggle we are in this land, only 4% of U.S. media uses the word occupation. So even the legal term of what we are living under is not even mentioned in the U.S. media. So, as an organization, we said, okay, this is a challenge, and yes, we could complain about it, but what are we going to do? And we said, let's do something. So we established a press agency called Palestine News Network, PNN, which is a web-based service in several languages that provides news to what happens in Palestine, and news that is reliable, that is truthful, that shows a different view of the Palestinians than what is usually presented in the Western media. And the last challenge we work on is addressing the issue of how can we get people to really know what is happening here. And what we found out, the best way is to encourage people to come and visit. So yes, you could listen to alternative media, you could look at different websites, you could read different books, but until you come here and spend a few days just discovering the land and seeing the situation and meeting the Palestinians and sleeping in a Palestinian's house and meeting the peace groups on both sides and seeing the complexity of the situation, but also seeing the lights of hope on both sides, then you will begin to get a grasp on what is happening. And this is part of a program called the Travel and Encounter, which we function as a normal tour operator, and people can call us up and say, we have 10 people, 15 people that want to come and visit, and we'll arrange a whole tour. It could be a pilgrimage, it could be political fact-finding, it could be volunteer work that they want to do with the local community. Whatever they like to do, we could arrange that for them.
Now, is it difficult to have a voice of non-violence? It seems like in some ways that violence always gets a result.
Well, I would say that for us, what we have seen with nonviolence, it's been like a roller coaster effect. Sometimes within the Palestinian community, we see a lot of attraction and acceptance of nonviolence, but then immediately we might have some act of violence, let's say by the Israeli military or the settlers, that immediately shift the community into a sense of wanting retaliation and revenge and payback for what happens. Immediately it goes into violence. And as soon as the community then is adopting a framework of violence, or what's called armed resistance, then it becomes much more difficult for us, of course, to engage in a talk about nonviolence. But I would say that even with this roller coaster of going up and down, more recently we have seen nonviolence being more and more accepted within the Palestinian community. Theoretically, I would say the greatest majority of Palestinians now understand that nonviolence is a means for us to move forward in our resistance to end occupation. As I said before, it hasn't shifted into a practical sense, and one of the reasons is the missing of leadership that are able to take this to a new level. But yes, I mean, the voice of violence, as you know, does make it loud, and it does make it in the press, and especially in the Western media. When a Palestinian commits an act of violence, immediately it's pulled through all the media, this act of violence. But when daily actions of nonviolence are happening in Palestine, very, very little attention, if any, is paid to it. And we want to encourage media to really look at this as a real, viable movement that is being born in Palestine. And as I said, it is growing, and it is becoming more and more accepted, even by individuals or groups that had historically adopted a militant point of view in Palestine.
I guess in some ways, when I think of a young Palestinian, you think of them out there throwing stones at Israeli soldiers. How do you change their mentality into a peaceful way and a peaceful approach?
Well, I mean, one thing we need to acknowledge is that there is a high level of anger and tension and frustration that lies in the minds and the hearts of these young Palestinians, either out of being denied access to schools, out of seeing their family members being beaten up or arrested by the soldiers, seeing their home or their neighbor's home demolished, which is something that happens almost on a daily basis, seeing and witnessing attacks by soldiers, or worse even than soldiers are the attacks that are done by Israeli settlers on Palestinian farmland and Palestinian homes and so on. So again, the anger and the frustration and the violence does not come out of a vacuum, that there is a cause that needs to be recognized. And acknowledging that cause doesn't mean we justify the act of violence. We justify the anger that exists, and we say, now let us work with that anger. So it's not about suppressing anger or ending anger. We actually, if people do not get angry when they see human rights violations, then they're not human. I mean, they're not alive. So anger is part of the recognition that something exists. The question is, how can we, with the recognition and acknowledgement of this anger, provide alternative tools for expressing that anger, which are the tools of nonviolence, and that can not just be expressive of the anger, like throwing the stone is more of an expression of the anger, be it violent, but it's still an expression that does not really achieve a result. So we want to convince these young men and women to express their anger in a way that create the space for expression and at the same time achieve a result, which is the point of nonviolence, to empower yourself to be able to transform the society of your enemy, to transform the other into understanding that their oppression is not just hurting you, it's hurting them as well. It's a process and it takes time, but this is part of the training that we do, and we've done tens and hundreds of trainings with Palestinian youth and women and children in this regards.
In some ways, when I talk to Palestinians, they seem very hopeless, and the situation just seems very difficult for them. How do you give them a sense of hope in what really does seem to be a hopeless situation?
Well, yeah, I think actually what I would say is that the biggest obstacle to developing a nonviolent movement now, in addition to the issue of leadership, is the sense of resignation and hopelessness. So the opposite of nonviolence in our context is not violence. It's giving up and surrendering and feeling that nothing can happen, and just whatever destiny will bring, and that can mean we live or we die. We don't know, and we don't care. And this is the biggest challenge for us. And for us, what we do, and again, part of the work that we do, especially with young people, is to install hope in them first, to recognize and acknowledge their own ability to deal with issues themselves. And it's a process. It's not about saying, okay, we have a group of 20 people, and between the ages, let's say, of 18 and 20, and we're going to say, okay, you 20 people are going to liberate Palestine tomorrow. But it's really challenging them and opening opportunities for them to work actively and proactively within their community to start with. It could be a volunteer placement work, or a community project, or a service in an organization, or dealing with an issue that is a violent issue for them within the community. Like, for example, violent behavior from parents towards children, or violence in the school system, or the taboo issue of honor killing, which is an issue that exists in many countries in this region, killing innocent women because of accusation that they were with a man or something like that. So it's a step-by-step approach. It's a systemic and holistic approach to build their character and to build their confidence and build up a sense of hope that they can look at conflicts and issues of violence and be actively involved in resolving them, and then grow to a next level, and then grow to a next level, with the hope that one day, as they develop themselves and their leadership ability, they will reach that point where they are able to make the bigger political engagements at the top level, using also the tools of nonviolence. So when people are hopeless, it does take a lot of time to put them back on track, and this is part of the process we engage with.
Now, you were in a film, Little Town of Bethlehem. What was it about?
Little Town of Bethlehem is a film done by an American production company that takes three characters: myself as a Palestinian Christian, a Palestinian Muslim, and an Israeli Jew, and they follow our life stories. And it starts, of course, before we were born, so even as far back as 1948 and before, so where our families came from. And it talks about the violent experiences that we either suffered ourselves or our families suffered, and how the three of us separately have made choices to not engage in violence and revenge and retaliation as a means of as a response to what happened to us, but to engage in nonviolence. And it's a great film done in a very beautiful way, where even the narration is done by us. So only the three of us are speaking our stories throughout the film. What's exciting about this film is that it was done by a production company that is a Christian production company, that the producer became very interested in the Middle East after 9/11. And he said, there's something missing about what's happening there. And he wasn't just buying the simple or simplistic argument that it's just about bad people and good people, that there is a reason why all this happened. And he began to travel around the Middle East, and he discovered nonviolence, and he discovered that the Palestinians and Israelis who are committed to resolving this conflict through nonviolence. And he said this is a message that the American public, but also communities all around the world need to hear. And that's when he decided to do this film.
And why did you get involved with the film?
Well, I want to say by coincidence, and because this producer came to meet with me before he decided on choosing me to be part in this film, to give him ideas on what he should do a film about. And so we were discussing different ideas and talking to different people, and then he asked me, well, tell me more about what you do. And just like what I explained to you, I told him the things that I'm involved in, and then he went back to the U.S. and called me up and said, do you know a Palestinian Muslim that does this? I said, many. And he said, do you know an Israeli Jew that does this? And I said, many as well. He said, well, I need 3 of you. He said, you're one of them. And so I'm going to come back and do the film. Yeah, that's how I got involved in it.
Now, you're actually speaking in the U.S. very soon at the Euphrates Conference in St. Louis in the USA. What are you going to be speaking about there?
Well, this is a very important summit that's taking place, and I think many people need to follow it because it is bringing people from all around the world to discuss together on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. What are we going to do now to end violence? 9/11 happened, and of course it was violent and detrimental, and many people suffered on that day. But the reality is that as a result of 9/11, many, many, many more people suffered all around the world, from how other people responded to 9/11 or engaged with 9/11 or thought they had to deal with 9/11. So this summit comes at a point where many people feel a real transformation needs to take place. And for me, it's again about nonviolence. And I feel that this is where I'll be heading and talking about. And I feel, for me, when I talk about nonviolence, that nonviolence is not just about means and tactics of resisting the oppressor or resisting the enemy. Nonviolence, for me, is also about a process of healing and reconciliation in a very deep way, that if our global leadership give real space for this to happen, we can see a real global transformation take place. And I'm hoping that this Euphrates Summit will be a launchpin of such a global movement to take place in the near future.
Did 9/11 affect the Palestinian world?
Definitely. I mean, I remember that day very well, like everybody. It's one of those days where you just know exactly what you were doing. And as soon as it was known that it was not just a one-plane accident, but it was a terror attack that included several planes, I remember my first thoughts, like many, many people, was who is behind this? And if it is Arabs, if it's Muslims, if it's Palestinians, then what are going to be the consequences? But then it did affect, our work or the Palestinian community overall, because 9/11 put a real stop in how U.S. policy was engaging in the Middle East, and how U.S. policy shifted from being in a space where diplomacy was given, or diplomacy had greater leverage, and negotiations and conflict resolution was a main force, to seeing that the only way to deal with what's allegedly called terrorism is, or the enemy is, through violence, oppression, and suppression and control. And for us as Palestinians, what we suffered from is not, of course, American suppression towards us, but the allowing of Israel to engage with us in a complete misproportion to even the acts of violence that we did. And the world remains silent. And I think this is a result of 9/11, that even small acts of individual attacks that we could label as terrorism, and maybe they are terrorism, led an entire community to be punished for these attacks. And when Israel did this to the Palestinians, the U.S. and the world remained silent, because this is how now we deal with terrorism and violence, which is through this mass attack and engagement. Because Israel can then go to the U.S. and say, well, you're doing this in Iraq, you're doing this in Afghanistan. Don't tell us what to do and not to do if you are doing the same. So Palestinians really suffered a lot as a result, even though, as you know, Palestinians had nothing to do with any of the 9/11 attacks.
What's the Palestinian view of the West?
Well, I would say it's a mixed view. For most Palestinians, the greatest majority of Palestinians, I think there is a high level of intelligence to distinguish communities from policy. So even this morning, for example, I was taken somebody up near the wall around Bethlehem, showing him the wall, and he's an American friend. And this Palestinian walked up to us, doesn't speak any English. He knows me and started asking me about this person. I said, yeah, he's an American. So he asked me, is he government or people? And I said, no, he's just a citizen. And he just did his, with his thumbs up for people, thumbs down for government. And and this is a simple, and I think he's a mechanic or something that understands that we admire the West and we admire the freedoms that people have and cherish, and the engagement in democracy and economic sustainability and freedom of expression. These are values that we adhere to and seek to have in Palestine. But people here also make a distinction to say that when it comes to policy, especially foreign policy, we are suffering as Palestinians from this, and we need this to stop. And this is why we're hoping that the U.S. would really look at this idea of declaring a Palestinian state in a different light, that it's not anti-Israeli, and this is actually fits perfectly with U.S. policy, what the Palestinians want to do, and we need to engage with this and have the U.S. understand that their interest also lies in the fact of seeing the end of the occupation and freedom and democracy and economic prosperity happen in the Holy Land, in both Palestine and in Israel.
How does the average Palestinian man on the street feel?
Well, the biggest feeling at this point is a big sense of anger and frustration, mixed with some resignation and hopelessness, as we said before. So for most Palestinians, even when they look at our own leadership, they do not have the level of hope and high expectation as you would have from your government or from the policies that you engage in. So yes, most Palestinians say our leadership is trying to do something different, to change the reality, to change the situation. But even with that, there isn't that much trust that anything will happen. So the average Palestinian now, I would say, is in a state of just wanting to survive, wanting to live. Economically, the conditions are very difficult in Palestine and in Bethlehem. We have one of the highest unemployment rates, even higher than Gaza. So people are just trying to find jobs, trying to get some money, trying to provide bread for their families. And once you are so entrenched in just this survivalist mentality, you're just, your thinking doesn't expand that. You just want to do what you can to provide bread and milk and food for your family for that day. And that's, of course, people need to do this as a priority, but that also does not create the space for people to address the bigger issues that are preventing that from happening for the entire community, which is, again, the occupation and the suppression of human rights and the sense of inequality that exists in this land.
And how do the youth feel? They're growing up from being children and maybe don't realize much of what's going on, but they're getting older and they start to realize, hey, there is a problem here. Are they growing up frustrated, or are they coping with it?
Well, it's interesting, and I'm sure studies are being done on this now, because this new generation of youth growing up is a generation that has never experienced occupation the way we have experienced it. So when my growing up as a young person in Bethlehem, and my experience of the occupation was seeing daily soldiers and settlers interacting with us, driving in our streets. They had their main headquarters right in the heart of Bethlehem. So we saw the occupation in its human face, in its physical sense. Now, this next generation of youth growing up is like a generation that has not seen soldiers unless they see them on TV, or if they go close to checkpoints. And they know they are under occupation. They're surrounded by walls and fences, but they have no human connection with the other. Even if it was a soldier, I still had an ability to have an eye contact with that soldier. And more than that, there were more Israelis that would go in and out of Bethlehem, and Palestinians were able to go to Tel Aviv and to Jerusalem and to Haifa when I was growing up. Now, it doesn't exist. I have a 9-year-old daughter. I was surprised to find out, even though I'm her father and live with her, that she has not met an Israeli Jew until this point. And I have many Jewish Israeli friends, and she has not met one. or a child her age. And this for me is a shock, and this for me is very dangerous, because now the enemy does not have a human face. And that's going to create more anger and more frustration, and even a more clearer sense of justifying violence against the other, because now they're just a blank face that lies on the other side, and they are suppressing us from the outside. And I'm very worried about the future generation of youth growing up here if this issue is not resolved quickly.
Do you think the wall has demonized both sides? You've got Palestinians who say Israel is bad and Israelis who say Palestinians are bad.
Of course, yeah. I mean, the same as it applies for the Palestinians, for the Israelis. Most Israelis don't even think about now what lies on the other side. It's not even on their mental map. For them, they see it just as a wall, and they don't even try to consider, what is life like on the other, or who is living there, or what issues they face. They drive by it on their highways. Many of them don't even know, as they drive by the wall, that there is actually communities on the other side. It looks more like a sound barrier or a farm fence in many cases. So yes, the division between both communities is really growing at a very fast pace because of what's happening with the wall and the checkpoints and the lack of allowing people to access and communicate with each other.
And we often hear about violence and bombings from the Palestinian side, but is there violence, for instance, from the Israeli settlers from that side?
There is the sad reality. I mean, it's not something to be proud of, to compare, but Palestinians, especially these days, are suffering tremendous violence from Israeli settlers. On a daily basis, you are hearing settlers burning down fields of Palestinian farmland or killing livestock for Palestinians, and not just in the numbers or the tens, in the hundreds and thousands of trees and hundreds and thousands of livestock are being killed and slaughtered and destroyed by Israeli settlers. And most Palestinians are afraid actually now to drive in areas in the West Bank because they are afraid of the violence of settlers towards Palestinians. So this is a very, very big concern. And again, the sad reality, as you said, people hear about the violence of the Palestinians, never on the violence of the Israelis, and especially the settlers who we feel can even become violent towards their own soldiers, Israeli soldiers at a certain point, if that means they have to do that. And this is something that I think all of us need to be worried about.
Now, when you say settlers, does that mean they're like religious Orthodox settlers that are settled in the land and feel that they're doing God a service?
Yeah, I mean, for most, many, let's say not most, but many settlers, they are what are called ideological settlers. And they fully believe that this is their land, and God gave them this land, and they have, of course, the addition to say nobody else is supposed to be on this land except them, and that the Palestinians have to be dealt with, and the Palestinians have to leave this land. And if they don't leave by choice, they will have to leave by force. And this is a reality that we face. And these settlers are very well armed, very well trained in using these arms, and they are very violent. And as I said, they are not just violent towards Palestinians. There have been many incidences where they have been violent against their own military, against Israeli soldiers. When they try to intervene in times when the settlers are doing violence towards Palestinians, they will get the brunt of the violence as well. So this is a very dangerous group that we are dealing with, and that the world again cannot remain silent for us to see another massacre. Like, for example, in 1993, when a settler on Ramadan, which is the holy month, on his own at 4 o'clock in the morning walked in a mosque during prayer in Hebron and killed over 30 Palestinians with a machine gun. Just that simple. And he was a medical doctor who did this.
Is that hatred still there today?
That hatred is still there. That hatred still exists. I mean, in Hebron is a very tense area. I mean, it's on the brink every day of something happening where we could see something like this at a mass scale. And again, nobody's doing anything about it. I mean, people try to hold back and try to suppress, but it's like a volcano, that unless we are able to do something about the settlers and their arming themselves and the soldiers allowing them to walk freely in the streets and put slogans on the wall like burn the Arabs and kill the Arabs and things like this, and they feel that they could do this without repercussions, it's just going to increase more and more. And as I said, the future is not looking good in this regards.
And that, of course, just brings a cycle of violence as well, doesn't it?
Of course, the moment there is one act of violence that happens, immediately, as I said before, then even people who may have wanted to commit to nonviolence, especially when violence hits them close to their families or to their communities, they immediately go into this place of taking revenge and retaliation. And it happens on both sides, the Palestinian side and the Israeli side. So it's not about resistance, and it's not about security, it's not about freedom. It's just about revenge and retaliation. And that is the most detrimental cycle of violence that we could get.
So you have Palestinians here in the land, and they've been left land year after year from their relatives, and they have the paperwork for the land. The land has belonged to them for many, maybe hundreds of years, and then a settler comes in and basically is wanting to steal the land from him. How do they cope with that?
Well, it's it's very difficult.
There must be a lot of frustration there.
It's frustration, it's anger, but the sad reality is the fact that people end up giving up and accepting these acts of violence because they don't want to lose more. So, and this, what happens is that the Israeli military or the settlers or the settler movement will go into a land and take it. And we've had this happen to us. We're an organization that we work with many villages, and we train people in how to resist such acts. The Israeli military would actually go to a farmer and say, listen, we've taken half of your land to build the settlement or to build the fence or to build the wall. If you engage in these acts of resisting and whatever you call nonviolence or popular resistance, and you begin to bring people here, then be assured we're going to take the other half of your land. So the farmer, in order not to lose his other half of his land, comes to us and says, please, don't do anything because I don't want to lose anymore. I've lost enough already. That's the heartbreaking reality that people face. And many of these farmers, I know actually one family that lost its land, and the only job they were able to get was to work as construction workers on the illegal settlement that was built on their land. And you could just imagine, the father probably cried every day as he went to work, building a house for an illegal settler on his land that was illegally stolen from him. But that's the only job opportunity that he had. And this is sort of the weakness that Palestinians live in and have, because the forces are much greater. And this is why the idea of building a grassroots leadership to stand up to these things from the villages and the farmers in nonviolence. The settlers cannot be addressed through violence. It's not going to work. They are very armed and very strong, and any act of violence will create destruction in unprecedented means. But through nonviolence, we need to be able to transform even the settlers, even the most extreme settlers, to begin to recognize that we are all human and we are all created in God's image as one people, and that we all have the right and the responsibility to respect the right of each other to live as equals on this land. And that is the core value that we need to seek. And then we could talk about what political arrangement to arrange. But until Israelis really, truly, and Palestinians truly recognize the full equal right of the other to live here. And as you said, we have historic narratives. The Palestinians will claim 3,000 years, and the Jews will claim 3,500 years, and the Palestinians will come back and claim 4,000 years. And, there's probably Jewish blood flowing through Palestinians more than Jewish blood flowing through many Israelis that come from other countries. So it's not about, genetic, and it's not about history. It's about now we live in a reality where we have Jews, Christians, and Muslims living in this land, and we will always be here. And we just need to find a way to live next to each other or with each other in respect and trust and community. And then we could create the political framework to fit then our own individual identities or communal identities the best way for that.
What's your prayer for the work that you're doing here in the land?
Well, my prayer is that, as I believe this is holy land and this is sacred land, where, as a Christian, I believe Jesus was born here and died here and was resurrected from this land, and the prophets of the Old Testament also were in this land, that this land will My prayer is that this land will regain its sacredness, and the people that live in this land will become the light of the sacredness to the world. That it's not about dividing the land, it's not about breaking up the land, it's not about building walls or fences on this land. It's about creating in this land a model of peace and reconciliation that the world can learn from and see that, yes, peace at a global level is possible because peace in the Holy Land was established between the people that live there.
And you have a website, finally, for people who'd like to know more. What's your website address?
Our website is holylandtrust.org, and you could follow us also on Facebook and Twitter. We use all of these social media programs now.
Great, Sami. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.